My name is Jonathan Miller. I'm 42 years old, a mechanical engineer by trade, and a husband by stubborn choice. We live in a two-story house on a quiet street in the suburbs, one of those neighborhoods where dogs bark at the same time. Every evening, and mailboxes have names painted on them like it means something. My wife's name is Clara, and if you asked me to describe her in a single word, I'd say elsewhere. She used to be the center of my world. No, she used to be the world. When we first met, she had this electric energy, like she lived in a private thunderstorm. Loud laughter, bold colors, strong opinions. She didn't just walk into rooms, she claimed them. I was drawn to her in the way moths are drawn to flames, fully aware of the burn but incapable of resisting it. When we were newlyweds, Clara would leave notes on the bathroom mirror with messages like, "Don't forget I love you," or, "You snore like a dying walrus." She used to dance in the kitchen, barefoot and off-beat, while dinner bubbled on the stove. She'd drag me out to midnight movies or chase thunderstorms just to feel the wind. But things change, slowly, quietly, like rust creeping under paint. Over the years, that brightness dimmed. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe after our daughter was born, or maybe when she went back to work full-time. She was still beautiful, still sharp, but distant. She no longer left notes. She no longer danced. She came home with her phone clutched like a weapon, answering texts with a smile that was never mine. I became background noise, a man-shaped piece of furniture. I watched it happen from the inside out. Her smiles stopped reaching her eyes when she looked at me. Her sentences turned into nods. Her nods turned into silence. She started staying late at work. Then she started going out with friends from the office. I never met any of them. The names changed frequently. The patterns didn't. One night I made chicken piccata her favorite, and waited until nearly 10 p.m. before she came through the door, slightly drunk and unapologetically radiant. She laughed at something on her phone and told me she had the best night. When I asked if she was hungry, she said no and went straight to bed. I stood in the kitchen alone, staring at the cold dinner, the wine bottle still unopened, and I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just stress, that people go through phases. Denial is a warm blanket that slowly smothers you. The signs were there. Always had been. I just didn't want to see them. I saw the new clothes she didn't explain, the unfamiliar cologne on her jacket, the quiet way she locked her phone before setting it on the table. But I wasn't ready. Not to confront, not to fight. I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, everything would fall apart. And somewhere inside me, I still believed that if I stayed steady, stayed quiet, maybe the woman I married would come back. That she was still in there, buried under fatigue and routine. I told myself I was doing it for our daughter, for the family. But deep down, I think I was just doing it for me. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Clara, even if I had already lost her. Then came the night that broke something. It was a Thursday. Clara told me she was going to sleep over at her friend Mia's house after a wine tasting event. "No, point in driving back so late," she said casually, slipping on her earrings. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her walk out the door with a bag slung over her shoulder and perfume trailing behind her like smoke. But something didn't sit right. Call it intuition. Call it paranoia. Whatever it was, it gnawed at me. Around midnight, I texted Mia. "Just checking in. Clara made it to your place okay?" No response. At 1:24 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. "I thought she was home with you tonight." I just stared at the screen. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That's the strange thing about moments like that. They don't explode. They settle. Like dust. I walked around the living room, barefoot, tracing the familiar floorboards as if they could give me answers. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I thought about calling her. I thought about driving around, checking places she might be. But I did none of those things. Instead, I sat in the dark and waited. She came home around 7 the next morning. She looked tired but smug, like someone who had pulled off a clever lie and was proud of it. Her makeup was smudged, her heels were in her hand. She walked past me, sitting in the living room without flinching. "You're up early," she said, stretching. I didn't respond. She paused halfway to the stairs. "Something wrong?" I looked at her for a long time. Really looked. At the curve of her shoulder, the faint hickey near her collarbone, the way her eyes darted away when I didn't smile back. Then I said the only thing I could manage. "No. Nothing." And she nodded, like that was the right answer. Like silence was the agreement we had both signed long ago. But something shifted in that moment. Not in her. In me. I had built my love for Clara like a house, brick by careful brick. But now the foundation was cracking, not because I stopped loving her, but because I started disappearing. For weeks after that night, Clara acted like nothing had happened, as if her little detour never existed, as if I hadn't texted Mia, as if I hadn't sat in the living room all night listening to the ghost of our marriage pacing the floors. And I let her, not out of forgiveness, not even fear, out of something much worse. Habit. There's a particular type of silence that forms in long-term relationships. The kind that's not really empty but overstuffed, stuffed with everything you're too exhausted to say. That was our silence. I wore it like armor, hoping it might protect what little was left. So I kept my mouth shut. I came home from work. I helped our daughter with homework. I fixed the loose faucet in the upstairs bathroom. I took out the trash on Tuesdays. I lived as though my life hadn't rotted beneath the surface. And that's when it started. The men. They came with laughter, with stories, with expensive watches and loud opinions. They arrived as colleagues, friends from the gym, old classmates passing through. They stayed for drinks. They stayed for dinner. One stayed until morning. The first time, I thought it was a mistake. I told myself I misunderstood the situation. Maybe he crashed on the couch. Maybe he'd had too much to drink. But the second time, the third, they weren't mistakes. They were patterns. Clara didn't bother hiding them. She dressed up. She smiled more. She played music louder than usual. She even cooked, something she hadn't done in months. I watched from the background, like a forgotten relative at a family reunion. She never introduced me. They barely acknowledged me. I became the man who fetched his own beer and disappeared upstairs like a ghost haunting his own home. But the worst of them was Ryan. He was young, 20-something, gym cut and tan. The kind of man who still thought confidence was a virtue and not a performance. Clara adored him. She touched him when she talked, laughed too hard at things that weren't jokes. Her eyes didn't just sparkle, they begged. Ryan saw me. That was the difference. The others ignored me, but Ryan looked at me like I was a failed experiment. He didn't say anything overt. He didn't have to. His smirk was fluent in disrespect. One evening, Clara invited him over for dinner. She didn't ask me. She didn't even tell me. I came home from work to the smell of seared salmon and garlic, music playing from the Bluetooth speaker, and Ryan sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine in his hand like he owned the lease. "Hey, man," he said, nodding at me. I nodded back, went to the sink, started washing the knife I'd used to cut up vegetables earlier that week. It had dried, parsley stuck to the blade. The steel gleamed under the kitchen light. Ryan chuckled at something Clara said. She tossed her head back and laughed, her hand resting on his forearm. I kept rinsing the knife. The faucet hissed, water spilling over my fingers. He noticed the knife. I noticed him noticing. He went quiet. So did Clara. That moment stretched like pulled gum, thin, tense, and sticky, with something unspoken. I placed the knife gently on the rack and dried my hands. Ryan left early that night. Claimed he had an early meeting. He didn't finish his wine. He never came back. Clara didn't ask why, didn't mention his name. It was as if he'd never existed. Another chapter torn out and thrown away. I wondered how many others had disappeared like that, how many exits were paved in silence. She didn't apologize. Not for him, not for the ones before him, not for the wreckage she left in her wake. Clara had convinced herself that none of this mattered, that as long as the roof didn't collapse and the bills were paid, everything was still intact. But something in her changed after that night. She started glancing at me differently, with more calculation, less dismissal. Like she wasn't sure what I was anymore. A fool? A threat? A question mark? She became slightly more careful. The laughter was quieter. The parade of men slowed. The music didn't play as loud, but the damage had already sunk into the walls. We were sitting at the dinner table a few days later, just the three of us. Our daughter, Lila, was showing us a drawing she made at school. "Look," she said brightly, holding it up. "That's Mommy, and that's me, and that's Uncle Ryan." Clara froze. My fork paused mid-air. "And that's you, Daddy," she added, pointing to a small figure drawn to the side, alone, holding what looked like a watering can. "Why am I holding that?" I asked, forcing a smile. Lila shrugged. "I don't know. You're always in the garden when her friends come over." Clara cleared her throat. "That's a really nice drawing, sweetheart," she said, taking the paper and folding it too quickly. I said nothing. But inside me, something cracked again, something deeper than before. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was numb. And numbness, I've learned, is not peace. It's just the waiting room for something far worse. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering. One of Clara's friends from her marketing job was throwing a backyard soiree. Wine tasting, small bites, a playlist curated by someone who used to DJ in college. Clara was excited. She spent nearly 2 hours getting ready, changing dresses. Twice, asking our daughter if her heels looked too much. She didn't ask me if I was coming. Just left the envelope on the kitchen counter, as if the ink would do the talking. I went anyway. It was held at a large modern house in the hills, with glass railings and terraced landscaping. People mingled in clusters under string lights, holding stemless glasses and laughing a little too loud. Clara blended in effortlessly, light on her feet, magnetic as ever. I stood near the bar, sipping a weak Cabernet and pretending to care about the local football team while watching her float through the crowd. And then I saw him, Tom. Tall, graying at the temples in that deliberate way older men try to look younger. Expensive blazer, too much cologne. The kind of man who tells you what brand of car he drives within the first 5 minutes. Clara laughed at something he said, her fingers brushing his chest in a way that made my teeth grind. I could read the body language like subtitles. She was interested, he was flattered, and neither cared that I was 10 feet away. At some point, I lost track of them. I walked through the house, past guests discussing documentaries they hadn't seen and diets they didn't follow. I found the patio doors ajar and slipped into the backyard, where shadows swayed with the rhythm of soft jazz. They were there, Clara and Tom, near the edge of the garden, by a hedge thick enough to hide behind. I stood beneath a tree and watched. Not close enough to hear, but close enough to see the way her hand lingered on his arm, the way he leaned in, how her head tilted when he whispered something into her ear. And then they kissed, not a drunken, sloppy peck. A deliberate, practiced kiss, like they had done it before. Like it had meaning. She glanced around afterward. Not in guilt. In calculation. She didn't see me. I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and throat. The anger I expected didn't come, nor the sadness. Just a quiet, creeping sense of finality. This wasn't the breaking point. That had happened long ago. This was just the confirmation. Eventually, they walked back toward the house. I waited another minute, then followed through a different door and returned to the party. When Clara found me later, her hair slightly tousled, her lipstick retouched but uneven, she smiled. "Have you been outside?" "Just stepped out for some air," I said. She studied my face for a second too long, then changed the subject. The next morning, Tom was gone. Not just from the house, gone. Clara received a short text around noon. Something about needing to leave town unexpectedly. Personal matters. Unresolved commitments. She didn't elaborate. She deleted the message right after reading it. I didn't ask, but I watched her. She was quieter that week, less sharp, less sure. She moved around the house with caution, as if the air itself had become unpredictable. We still had dinner together, but she chewed slower. She glanced at me more, not affectionately, not lovingly, curiously. It was the look of someone who realized they'd miscalculated the depth of still water. She began turning down invitations, staying home more often. She started sleeping with the bedroom door unlocked again, asked me once if I wanted to rewatch a movie we hadn't seen since we were dating. I said sure. She fell asleep 20 minutes in. I studied her while she slept. She looked peaceful, innocent almost, like someone else's wife. The house changed too. It wasn't loud anymore. There were no new guests, no mysterious perfume wafting through the hallway. The Bluetooth speaker stayed off. The air was thick with something unsaid, and that silence began to feel like power. But power, I learned, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like weight. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel avenged. If anything, I felt more alone than ever. But now, I was the one holding the reins. She was the one adjusting, guessing, tiptoeing. Not because of anything I'd done, because of what I hadn't. And that terrified her more. One night, I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of our bedroom. Door creaking open, I didn't move, just breathed evenly, eyes half shut. Clara's silhouette paused at the doorway, then drifted into the hall. I heard her bare feet pad softly down the stairs. A drawer opened, closed. The refrigerator door clicked. Water ran. Still, I didn't move. I waited. After a few minutes, she climbed the stairs again. Her shadow paused by the bedroom doorway, as if checking to see if I was still there, still asleep, still real. She stood for nearly a minute. Then she walked away, down the hall, into our daughter's room. I exhaled slowly, not because I was relieved, but because I knew she hadn't gone down for water. She had gone looking for me, and she hadn't found me. Life on the surface became normal again. We started eating breakfast together, toast, eggs, coffee with 2 sugars. Clara would smile across the table, sometimes genuinely, sometimes out of habit. On weekends, we took Lila to the park. We even posed for family photos under golden trees, faces carefully arranged to look like a postcard version of happiness. But beneath it all, under the eggshell smiles and neatly made beds, was something else, a current. Not love, not hate. Something colder, something quieter. Clara had stopped bringing men around, stopped texting in corners, stopped disappearing overnight. She checked in now, left doors open, started looking at me before she spoke like someone checking for traps, and I played along. I kissed her cheek before work, took out the trash, laughed at her stories. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my voice. I just existed, present, calm, attentive. And that, more than anything, seemed to frighten her. She didn't know what I was thinking, couldn't read the silence anymore. Couldn't tell if I was pretending or plotting, or if I'd already made up my mind about her and was just waiting for the moment to act. She once asked me, "Are we okay?" I smiled and said, "We're fine." And we were, in the same way a storm is fine before it touches land. Then he showed up, a man from her past, before me. His name was Owen, an ex-boyfriend, I gathered, though she never referred to him as such. "Just someone I used to know," she told me, her voice too level, her eyes too wide. He sent her a message first, then flowers, then showed up outside her work. She didn't tell me immediately. I found out when I spotted her standing in the driveway one evening, talking to someone through the window of a black sedan. Her body language was wrong, rigid, defensive. She was holding her arms, nodding too quickly. When she came inside, I asked, "Friend of yours?" She flinched, just slightly, enough to confirm everything. "It's nothing," she said. "Someone I haven't seen in years, just passing through." I didn't push, but she didn't sleep that night. I could feel her shifting in bed, sighing, under her breath, turning toward me, then away. The next day, she found an excuse to come home early. She started keeping her phone closer, double-checking the locks. I'd catch her staring out the window sometimes, lost in thought. Not romantic thought. Survival. "One night," she whispered, "if someone from my past showed up, would you protect me?" I looked at her. "From what?" I asked. She didn't answer. I think that's when she realized something important. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I had become something else entirely, and that scared her more than any argument ever could. The next morning, I stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror while shaving. My hand paused halfway through a stroke, razor hovering just below my jaw. I looked at my reflection, not the eyes or mouth or hair, but the totality. The presence. I didn't recognize the man in front of me, not because I looked different, but because I felt absent from my own skin. The old Jonathan, the man who loved Clara like a lighthouse clings to shore, he was gone. Not dead, just submerged, replaced by something more efficient. Colder, stronger. She had stopped controlling me, but in doing so, she had set something worse loose. Later that week, we were cleaning out the garage. A normal weekend chore. Clara found an old box of photos from our honeymoon. She pulled one out. Us on a beach in the Bahamas, arms around each other, sunburned and laughing. She stared at it for a long time. "You used to look at me like I was everything," she said softly. "You were," I replied. She didn't look up. "And now?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. That night I heard movement again, sheets rustling, feet hitting the floor. I stayed still. She walked around the house, checked the locks, peered into the shadows, opened the closet in the hallway, then walked back into the bedroom, stood beside the bed, and just stared at me. I kept my eyes closed. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she whispered something I didn't expect. "Who are you now?" I didn't move, didn't speak, and that silence answered her better than any words could. The next morning, at breakfast, she was quiet. Lila chatted about school. Clara smiled and nodded, but her eyes stayed on me, studying, measuring, wondering, not what I'd do, but who I had become. And for the first time in a long time, she said nothing. No passive-aggressive jokes, no charming deflections, just silence, the kind that tastes like fear. She looked at me like I was a stranger sitting in the skin of someone she used to love, a man shaped like memory, but hollowed out by something she couldn't name, and I looked back at her, not with anger, not with love, with understanding. Because now I knew the truth. She wasn't afraid of losing me, not anymore. She was afraid of staying near me, of what that meant, of what I had become in the stillness, of the quiet man across the table who never raised his voice, and never looked away. And the last line I'll leave you with, the only one that still echoes when the house goes dark and the air goes still. Now she's not afraid of losing me. Now she's afraid of staying.